So let's dive into a short demo. I've sort of selected two use cases that I want to maybe illustrate. One is around a hybrid cloud environment, and this is more around demo POC scenarios. And then DevOps CI/CD over Azure example, which is also based on some customer blueprints and experience. First of all, let me log into the Cloudshell platform. And what you can see here is the self-service catalog. I will go into more details when we discuss that. I just want to point out that on the top section, we have these different categories, which are the ones that I was describing around blueprints, sandboxes, which are live environments, and then inventory to maybe map the physical infrastructure in as well. I am now taking the role of a designer, somebody who wants to create an architecture, just like you said, maybe a few VMs and a VLAN. So let's do that. I'm just going to click the Create a Blueprint button. And what we'll see here is an empty canvas. And this is something that is very baseline to the experience of working with Cloudshell. We start with an empty canvas, and then we start populating it using the building blocks we have ready. So let me open up the apps catalog. And here are apps that I imported and drew from various public sources, as well as ones that are in my private image repositories. For the sake of the demo, let me just drag in maybe an OS. It's a very simple app. So this gets added to my canvas. And I can go ahead and also maybe drag in a physical resource if I want. So this is my physical inventory. Let's look for a firewall in this case. Let me drag that in as well. Now, let's drag in some connectivity, as you mentioned. So let's go to the networking building blocks that I have here that are set up. And let's drag in a VLAN. And VLAN auto means that it will automatically create the actual VLAN, allocate the ID out of the pool of available VLANs, and make sure that it's in use by that environment alone. Next, to connect something to that VLAN is just a matter of drag and dropping a line between the two elements. That's all that's required. Behind the scenes, when that environment spins up, that connectivity will be taken care of as a part of that multi-stage stacked provisioning process that I was showing you earlier. Next, we can also connect the physical resource to the VLAN. And behind the scenes, all of the switches or physical switches it is connected to, if that's the case, will be used as well. One other thing that I want to show you maybe is that dragging in an app, and this is, again, very dependent on how you configure the experience for the end user and what policies and permissions are in place. But apps can have multiple really deployment options. So let's say I drag this app, which I prepared before, and I've mapped it to different deployment options in different clouds. So I immediately get asked whether I want to deploy this on my POC vCenter or on my AWS dev account. And the advantage of that is that we have one place where we're keeping track about how to deploy and configure that app. And we can use the same building block in different clouds.
So I assume in this context, you're running this blueprint. You're creating the blueprint as if you were the DevOps architect, right? You're creating this for the end users to consume.
Yeah.
Do you have the concept of users going in and requesting their own blueprints?
Definitely.
Okay.
So
I assume there's some workflow process where
and it's very much related to the maturity and how the customer is really handling that workflow.
But it can be bottom-up driven as well.
Yes, exactly. So and then sometimes there are sort of a gated way to get these environments approved. So I would submit my architecture. Yeah. I would still want somebody to review it,
Verify,
and then I
would check, approve.
However, I just want to mention that the environments we really invested a lot in supporting parameterization, and in order to make sure environments are you can create very reusable building blocks and very usable environments, so that if I need something from a different release or something that's slightly different configuration, I don't need to draw up a whole new environment just for that user request. So let's go look. So I've shown you a pretty simple example. Let's go look at what maybe a more complex environment would look like. Again, merging some examples from some of what our customers are doing. So in this case, I'm going to, by the way, this is the self-service catalog. And as you can see, we have several categories in here. So let's go to the POC Cloud category, where I have pre-prepared a couple of environments, again, that I merged from various examples that I found are being used by our customers. So this is a more elaborate example, but it really uses the same sort of building blocks or steps that we saw before. In this case, that environment is being used in order to test or to demo the application in an environment that's very realistic. The customer is developing a security type of application, and they want to demo it in a realistic setting that is close to what would be the network environment for their customers. But important here is to note that we have physical assets on the left-hand side. And we have some servers that are collected through a VLAN network to a firewall. We have several networks running on a virtual VSRX switch, in this case. And then we have some management network. We have some monitoring and security scanning tools that are in place that allow us to get some feedback during the demo. What I'm going to do next is really take a step back and log in as a user to basically show you what that experience looks like.
How are each of these pieces of the blueprint? Do you have a list of qualified vendors that you work with? Are there providers of some type to connect to this? What in your physical inventory? I'm assuming you have some type of HCL that who you work with, who you don't work with.
So, lucky for us, we have many of our customers are also the vendors themselves. So they contribute shells to work with their devices to our platform and to our community. That is why we have such a large selection of resource types already modeled. And in addition to that, when a customer encounters something that we don't integrate with beyond maybe on a basic level, they can use our SDK, which they usually do, in order to develop their own integration, and then they contribute that back into the community. By this point, we have, in that sense, a very mature offering, in that most customers we come to, we already can model most of their building blocks.
Are those integrations owned by the vendor for the lifecycle, or do they
No,
pass?
all of our community content is open sourced.
Okay.
So let me log in as an end user. Now, in this case, I'm not allowed to create any new environments, but let me go ahead and schedule that environment we were looking at before. So creating an instance of that environment is pretty simple. It's just a matter of clicking the reserve button. And in here, of course, I'm prompted for the duration that I want that environment up for. I can also, and this is very useful in the case of a demo, I can also schedule ahead and say, let's say I want that environment to be up 7 a.m. tomorrow, already set up and ready. You'll notice that there is a maximum duration policy in place on this environment. And this is a part of, again, the kind of control that an administrator or an IT person can exercise in order to make sure environments are being used correctly and not spun up endlessly. Here we also have a parameter, which is, let's say, the application release version that I want to be installed on that environment. Based on my selection, the orchestration will take the correct binaries from Artifactory or Nexus or which artifact repository I'm using, and then make sure that is installed and configured on the environment. So as that environment is being deployed, I want to again mention what is the magic that's happening behind the scenes. So, and by the way, you can see that this environment was also added some documentation or instructions for the demo by the designer. So as the environment setup is running, all of the infrastructure is being provisioned. Physical resources are being allocated to me. And if they were not available, I would get a conflict resolution option or alternative time slots where I do have some resources available. And then you can see, and we'll see that in a moment, that it is also possible to add some automation on top of that environment. In this case, on the right-hand side, you can see there are some commands for the demo scenario that were prepared for me. In this case, changing the network configuration, maybe starting traffic on the traffic generator that I'm using. Because this can take some time, let me skip to an already prepared version of the same environment that I have up. So this environment is now ready. And as you can see, all of the devices are up. We can look and see that they each have their own IPs and are ready to use. One nice thing is that we, as I said, provide connectivity as well as create an isolated environment. So even if the specific instance doesn't have a public IP, we can sort of help you connect to it via web. We take care of the credentials, so there is no need to worry about users and passwords for each VM or keep an Excel file, as I've seen some customers do. But simply, as you can see here, for each element, we have a few options. One of them is getting an SSH or an RDP connection into that machine. And this is remotely SSOing, again, by being connected to Cloudshell. We sort of take care of either using a key or using a password or user, depending on the platform that you're using, in order to help users be productive. And the same goes for remote RDP for our Windows machine. And by the way, we're also going to launch a similar feature for containers where you can just go into the console for that specific container. In addition to that, as we saw, we have some automation that we can work on that environment. So in this case, we have the changing the network configuration option, as well as the starting the simulated traffic. Starting simulated traffic will simply use the automation that's available as a part of our traffic generator building block. So when I do start traffic here, it will actually load the configuration and start running traffic. So I can start testing this environment. Most of these assets are not mocked at all. And I can actually go and check each and every one if I go to their public IP. We're a bit short of time, so I'm going to continue to the next use case, if that's OK. So
what does the front end of that look like for the, so this is the blueprint, but the front end, what will the users see?
So some users, they want to really show their customers, if it's a demo or something like that, they really want to show the architecture. It's really important to see the diagram. Sometimes they would just prefer to see something else, like maybe a list of VMs, their status, and an easy way to get their IP, and again, remotely RDP or SSH to them as needed, as well as call the command. So we have various types of ways to customize the interface or white label it so that it's a more customized experience. So let's go back to where we were before. And maybe log in as a different user. This time, I'm going to target the more DevOps type scenario. So again, this is the self-service catalog. Only this time, I'm going to go into the DevOps category. And this is based on real-life examples of how customers put our products to use. So the idea is that once you start having these building blocks, you can start creating environments that are useful to everyone. They're useful for training. They're useful for support. We even have some cases where they're being used when marketing needs a specific unreleased feature branch of the software to run focus groups on. It's just very easy once environments are simple. In this case, we have various stages of the release pipeline and various tools doing different things with environments. We have an environment that is running web tests, either manually or via automation. In this case, it's using integration with Sauce Labs. We have a different environment running what we call last mile tests, which are really the tests that you want to run that simulate the actual production environment as much as possible, where you want to test stuff you don't usually test. For example, that there is nothing missing in your CDN that your website depends on, that the cache services are working correctly. And here we're integrating with BlazeMeter and White Hat in order to test for security and for performance. And finally, and you can see here, by the way, also a nightly environment used by Jenkins, as well as a shared environment used by the Scrum team, in this case, to run tests and develop. So in this case, some of the developers are also open source, and they can't actually go and configure all of these individual components on their laptops. Sometimes they're not allowed because some of that data shouldn't be outside the corporate network. So in this case, they're getting sort of a ready-made environment or sandbox to start coding and connect their IDE to. Just to show you what the orchestration for that environment look like. So usually, since our orchestration is really an engine, and we have a very easy way to add steps to it and support all sorts of parallelization. In this case, the orchestration does much more than just set up the environment. It extracts the production data and redacts it, removes some sensitive data and validates that it's removed, and also skews some of the dates in order to make sure that it's consistent with the time you're spinning it up. Then we copy some release binaries. We can configure the application services and also configure the CMS, the content management system that's used here. And then configure some cloud services as well as sort of individual steps that you can add and include in an environment or not include as you want. And finally, we have one environment that's that's more lightweight that I'm going to spin up, which is just for API testing. So this represents the ability to really go through, take a subset of our application and spin up only that subset. So quite in the same way, I'm going to spin up that environment. And what will happen is that once everything gets deployed, soon the setup workflow will start happening. You'll notice here that we have also the ability to create a snapshot of this environment. And this goes back to your question before. Once the environment reaches a certain state, and sometimes it's useful to get to a certain state in order to design the environment, but sometimes it's very important to do that in order to maybe reproduce a problem that once it occurred and have that saved so that the QA team can look at it later. So once again, in the interest of time, I'll just shift to a working version of that same environment. And similarly, you can see here that all of the components are spun up, and I can actually go ahead and integrate them with them as before, connecting my IDE and so on. There is one concept that I really want to touch on that is rather unique to how we approach environments. So we look at basically immutable environments as sort of an evolution of immutable infrastructure. And the way I think about it is immutable infrastructure was made because we managed to, it was possible to start to spin up a new VM instead of having to deal with the complexity of state, of managing the config management of existing long-running machines that work just because somebody tweaked something there before. So as soon as it became very, very easy to just create a VM instead of that, and very, very fast as well, which wasn't the case, or it was impossible when we were dealing with physical machines. Then immutable infrastructure became feasible and really removed the need for many solutions that we had before to deal with state management. And at this point, it is our feeling that we're approaching the same state with environments, where spinning up an environment is becoming easier, becoming quicker, so that instead of maintaining the state between different elements of the environments or understanding what happened to that environment, you can always spin another one. And what we see is that this is helping replace many models in which, for example, staging environments were static environments that were up there, and people had to keep updating them. And instead, you want a staging environment, you can just spin a new one up. And this is like something that we see happening with many of our customers and that we help facilitate.
So along the path of doing immutable environment and spinning these up and down quickly, what do you have as far as versioning? What do the blueprints look like for end users when they see that these changes occur? And is there any way to go along the full CI/CD pipeline for them to put back in notes or feedback or requests?
So everything that happens to the environment is recorded in the activity feed here. So
Well, I'm even wondering if a user wanted to go back and check out what was the version of the environment from 2 weeks ago on that blueprint. Can they roll back to a prior version for testing to do side-by-side comparison?
Definitely. So basically, they can, and there are two types of versions here, right? There is the applicative version,
Yes.
let's say the version of the software or the change that I'm deploying, and then there is the version of the blueprint itself.
Okay.
So finally, to summarize, so in my opinion, or at least from what I've seen working with many organizations, as DevOps starts scaling up, there are really three different vectors that are being worked on at the same time. On the one hand, automation, replacing any manual steps, getting to quicker environments. On the other hand, we have adopting a self-service approach, which, at least from my experience, is the only scalable way for a DevOps team to work. Otherwise, they just get bogged up trying to take care of everybody's problems all of the time. And then controlling the cloud expenses, controlling the cloud usage, but then also moving to the cloud very quickly. And where I see, what I really like about our product is that we're a unified platform for all three of these vectors. We take all of them into consideration in our platform. And this really helps break silos and ensure that we make sure that IT is comfortable with adopting our solution because they have complete visibility into what's going on, what activities are in place, what environments are being spun up. Just the same as for developers, it's very easy to know that they have a reliable, sort of repeatable automation for environments, that it's one click and it will always work. And then to go back to the original roles and personas I defined, the architect can ensure that if they get a problem, it's because they did maybe something wrong and not because somebody misconfigured something.
So if a customer has certain tools in place that kind of overlap with your product already, say like a Terraform or a Puppet, can you integrate with any of those to save them the pain of recreating their existing work, or are they going to start from scratch?
Yeah, definitely. And as you could see, we support Ansible built in as just as a building block, and for Puppet and Terraform, it's something that we orchestrate. I think that we have very big differentiator in comparison to these platforms. And most of them are around really looking at the entire use case and not just provisioning infrastructure.
Right.
But yes, we do see it as sort of our philosophy to integrate with existing tools as much as possible. And it's also where our users are leading us, if you look at our community.
Do you want to talk about licensing a little bit, or how you charge for your product?
So we charge by concurrent running environments. So basically, it makes sense because you can create how many blueprints you want. You can import as many infrastructure you want. You can spin up as many VMs as you want. But our way to really track adoption of the product is to see how many environments you're spinning up concurrently.
Do you show any visibility of like what that blueprint will cost on different platforms? Like,
Showing cost for a blueprint?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a feature that our customers, who are always way ahead of us, went ahead and implemented in our platform. And it's definitely something we'll include out of the box as well, but it's already available as a community solution.
And in terms of also a flexible model about, say, you deploy to AWS, how current is for example, the storage cost model of that? Does it go out and pull AWS, find out what the cost of storage is as of today?
So that is why right now, and the way we do BI in general is we don't have a reporting tool, we have a BI tool. Which means you can integrate with various data sources and sort of create your own dashboards and sort of slice and dice the data as makes sense to you. Any attempt that we made to do canned reports that are one fit for all just didn't work. And so this is where we're at. And so which data source you pull in order to get the latest pricing is something that is really up to you and how you design that.
Can I ask a question?
Definitely.
We've been talking about this for a number of years, and I don't have any argument against the struggles that customers have with self-service and things like it, and all the way the product is structured, blueprints, et cetera. What is it that you're doing that is unique and different that other vendors aren't offering? That's not something that's... I'm trying to work out, why would I pick you over somebody else?
What would you have in mind?
Well, what used to be Dynamic Ops was acquired by VMware.
So that's a good question.
It's like
just-
nearly every major management company have a product like this that's multi-cloud aware with Blueprint.
That's a great question, by the way. But I come into I'm more solution engineer role and architect. So I come in to talk about the solution with customers and look at what they have as an alternative. And mostly we're up against sort of do-it-yourself kind of solutions, people who are creating their own sort of patch of scripts that together can get to a similar
But if
result.
a customer was going down this route, they would be looking at other vendors.
Yeah.
But I'm still not sure what makes you different from
So
everybody else.
which other vendors do you have in mind? So for example, if you're talking about cloud-native tools.
Ravello.
Okay, Ravello is a great example.
Yeah, other than the fact that they're limited to Oracle's cloud.
And the fact that they can't utilize the marketplace. So like we go to customers and they're struggling with Ravello. They're telling us they have to use a bring your own license model. It's a hell, sometimes a legal hell, just to make sure that all environments have everything checked out, that they have a lot of orchestration that is meant to solve problems we were dealing with 10 years ago when we didn't have pay-as-you-go licenses.
But to be fair, what Ravello does do.
So just to answer specifically on that, as I mentioned earlier, a very key differentiator for us is the ability to orchestrate the entire stack, including the physical. And that's not something a majority of these do.
Now,
And
when you say physical, do you mean physical servers or do you mean things like the network layer?
both.
Those.
But other vendors do network layer as well.
But then they do not go to the app layer.
Yeah. So they either do it hosted on their own clouds, and it's mostly in virtualized infrastructure context. Where we end up, getting chosen, as I mentioned earlier, is the whole stack, because there's still a lot of complexity with the physical infrastructure, and we solve that elegantly and go up the stack as well. And the second is we're not forcing anybody to go into a cloud of their choice. So if you look at Ravello or maybe even SkyTab, for example, they're all kind of hosted CM cloud solutions.
Yeah, but there are cloud management platforms that are multi-cloud aware.
Sure, but again, their focus isn't on pre-production and environments. Mostly they're into production. And that's where, it's important to see where is the philosophy you start from. Our philosophy has been focused more on pre-production, and now we'll get into production as well. Most of them came up either as configuration management platforms, or they came up in the production space as cloud brokers, and not necessarily do what we do. And that's one of the reasons why we get into customer environments. Again, this is not an SMB solution, right? So we don't go into small businesses. It's where we have large enterprises, large banks, large financial institutes. They have a lot of inherent complexity, and they use us to absolve that complexity and then sort of cloudify, as Roni mentioned.
I guess the point I'm trying to get at is, having looked at a number of presentations by different vendors in this space, including VMware, is the narrative around these sorts of technologies, everybody is all saying the same thing. And you could almost take out one vendor's set of logos and stick another one in, and it'll be exactly the same presentation.
But what I see as different with them, though, is they're the entire stack, whereas like VMware, it would take 3 different solutions to get from the, to get all the way up the stack. Same thing with Cisco's solutions. You would need a combination of ACI, UCSD, CWAM, and Cloud Center. So it would be 3 products or 4 products. whereas you guys are doing the whole stack.
And many of these people that you're mentioning, despite them having their own products, they are our customers as well. And that's for a reason. Okay, so there is a huge white space in there, which I agree with you that it is obscured by the noise, the buzzwords in the industry that tends to obscure. And so that is why when they see the demo and they see what it is capable of performing, going beyond the PowerPoint slides and the demo, that's when the aha moment sinks in for them. And once they start using it, it becomes very sticky and vice.
Don't get me wrong, from the demonstration, I've been very impressed, actually. It looks a very slick and well put together product. But demos are designed to do that, aren't they? But what I guess what I've been struggling with in the entire time we've been here is what that key differentiator is.
Yeah.
Yes, there are situations where you need 3 products that are bolted together. But often there are good reasons for doing that. Because if you have like one big stack, when it comes to innovating, you end up having to innovate the whole lot in one go. Whereas if it's broken up in chunks, a big company like VMware or even Cisco for that matter can innovate one particular part faster than another. So there is that modular approach is taken for development reasons as much as anything to get agility. I guess with a smaller company, you can have one solution that
It's the breadth of what you can model and orchestrate. For example, the first blueprint and the demo that Roni showed, maybe he did not get into the depth of it in the interest of time, but what you saw in that blueprint, both of these demos are actually live customer environments that were replicated. It's not concocted demos. So the first one actually is very rich in terms of there being a physical on-prem solution, there being security solution, a management plane, virtual infrastructure, and a public cloud, all being brought and orchestrated in the context of the same environment. And you'd be very hard-pressed to find any single vendor that's in a position to do that.
I think one of the differences that I see too is that in most of those other scenarios, you're purchasing hardware, software, plus management to be able to do some of these same things.
So again, our endeavor was to expose this to you, and I would highly encourage you to dig in, time of permitting, and would be happy to follow through with any additional questions. So it's, again, not possible in the context of 20 minutes to give the entirety of its scope, but hopefully this has piqued your interest, and that's really the objective of what we came here with. And as you're saying, today we made 2 major announcements. One was around the save and restore capability, and the other was we are now recognizing the fact it's a multi-cloud world, and there are clouds that exist beyond just the public clouds and the well-known private clouds. In fact, several of our customers have their own version of private clouds, which they find very hard to integrate in terms of these workflows. So we announced the ability to bring in their custom cloud into this workflow through a cloud provider template, which is, you can look at it as a loosely open source way of bringing their cloud version. And these are 2 pretty nice capabilities for larger customers that are dealing with this complexity. And we're also in the beta of a SaaS solution, which takes us all the way into production. We have beta customers on that. And so we'll be making some more announcements on that in the next couple of months as well.